feet and is developing an identity of its own. So I pay tribute to Sir Oliver and Natalie Loiseau for their leadership, as well as to the Bureau and PPA members for their work in shaping the body. I'm kept updated by Lord Ricketts and other members, and I am encouraged and impressed by what the PPA has achieved so far. The recent cordial and productive meetings are the result of this work and the relationships and understandings that you have built. I also welcome the observers present. We are very pleased to have representatives of the Welsh Seanad and the Scottish Parliament colleagues, as well as those from Northern Ireland, and also the Committee of the Regions and Economic and Social Committee with us today. And can I say that one of the first initiatives I undertook when I assumed my Lord Speakership role was to engage with the parliaments and devolved assemblies in the United Kingdom, because this Parliament is not a London-based Parliament, it's for the whole country, and I know that coming from Scotland. So it's very important to widen the franchise, and I'm delighted that that's been done. And this PPA brings democratic perspectives to current challenges, and those perspectives are richer for our colleagues' participation. And in the informal chats we had last night, the global issues have come up, and we could only make advance in these global issues if we all work together. So, as a PPA, it's very encouraging for me to see that work. Parliaments play a vital role in the oversight of the significant issues that you are discussing in the Assembly. Sir Lindsay regularly meets with our fellow speakers, including President Metsola, and I know from our discussions that she's also been a strong supporter of this Assembly. Working together as speakers in parliaments, I see the strength we have when we unite behind issues like climate change or the war in Ukraine. And I know, as a former MP, the barriers we can break down and the problems we can solve together for the benefit of our constituents. That is why I am particularly pleased that members of the UK Parliament, the EU Parliament and observers that were able to participate in the breakout groups yesterday and work collaboratively to find solutions for common problems. Our evolving trade relations need your oversight. You heard yesterday on the current state of those relationships, and I know that much work has gone on both through government channels and at this Assembly on issues such as the regulation of AI, which matter so much for our mutual prosperity. And this meeting is taking place alongside the negotiations at COP28 in Dubai. Many of our colleagues are there, and I understand that you will be hearing from some of them later. These are the issues that are too big for us to fight alone. Hence, we need cooperation and coordination. Although my role as Lord Speaker is non-political, I champion all of the parliamentary working with each other, as I mentioned. I also work to ensure that as an institution, we support and value the work that you do and that it is understood by the public. So I say thank you, Sir Oliver, for the work of the Assembly and the sessions that you've had. It's my privilege to greet you all and extend a warm welcome to the European Parliament's delegation to the Palace of Westminster. And I therefore wish you a productive and enjoyable session today and look forward to hearing more about it. So my very best wishes as Lord Speaker.
Well, thank you very much, Lord McFall, for your kind words and also for all the support you've given us and the welcome today. It's very much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you everybody, and a much warmer welcome this morning. We now come to our exchange of views on artificial intelligence, and we start with two guest speakers. Mr. Shadeep Bhatti, the MP, Minister for Tech and the Digital Economy in the UK Government. Is he around? Ah.
Just to say, the Minister's a couple of minutes late.
Oh, right.
Start with Mr. Weghorn.
Okay. Apparently our Minister is running a couple of minutes late, so I wonder if we can go on to Jorgen Warborn, MEP, Member of the European Parliament, who's going to speak to us on AI. Are you around, Jorgen?
I'm here.
Ah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for a wonderful reception yesterday night. It was indeed very pleasant to meet you all and to discuss all different kinds of topics together with you. So on artificial intelligence, for quite some time, artificial intelligence and how we regulate this fast developing technology has taken the center stage on a global discussions. The discussions revolve around acknowledging the amazing benefits this technology can offer us, but also the risk that comes with it. How do we strike the right balance is the question. During the last couple of months, the G7 nations have reached an agreement on shared guiding principles, emphasizing the need for a safe and trustworthy approach to AI. President Biden signed an executive order focusing on ensuring the security of this transformative technology. And here in the UK, the government held its first AI Safety Summit in the historical resonant setting of Bleachery Park, a summit which led to a coalition of 27 nations, including the EU, committing to a unified stance on AI and how to best cooperate to guarantee its safe advancement. In the European Parliament, we have been working on the so-called AI Act, the world's first comprehensive regulation of this technology. This has received a lot of attention since it might become the global standard of AI regulation. We have only a few minutes, so I will try to briefly take you through the current development of the Act. In June this year, the European Parliament adopted our negotiation position on the AI Act. And since there has been ongoing discussions with the Council that aims to reach a common agreement on this legislation. The Parliament's stance is to develop a framework of AI regulation that ensures the best possible condition for its deployment in use, recognizing its benefits whilst guaranteeing that AI use in the Union is safe, transparent, traceable, non-discriminatory, and environmentally friendly. Negotiations have been ongoing since June now between EU lawmakers, and now there only remain a few points of contention. First of all, about the foundation models, or what we call ChatGPT. There the Parliament sees great risks in contrast to the Council. Another example is that the European Parliament wants a total prohibition for AI facial recognition, whilst the Council seeks an exception concerning terrorism and kidnapping. On December the 6th, that is late tomorrow, we might reach a conclusion on the final act. I'm confident that the spotlight on artificial intelligence and the regulation of this rapidly evolving technology will stay on the global agenda for quite some time. The AI Act stands as one potential milestone, offering a framework for how we navigate and regulate this cutting-edge technology in the years to come. Thank you very much.
We're just checking outside to see whether our minister's arrived. Well, we still can't find our minister, so rather than have you all sit here wondering, in wonder about how warm it is today, just looking at the door. Natalie, do you want to have the first goer to respond to what you've heard so far? I'll bring you in again if there are other things.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this privilege of making initial comments. We all know that artificial intelligence is both an opportunity for businesses, for science, for health, and for all fellow citizens, but it also bears risks, as you very rightly mentioned. I was struck a few months ago meeting with some CEOs of tech companies where they were asking for regulations. They were fully conscious, and probably even better than we are ourselves as politicians, of the importance of guidance in this new technology. Maybe they know better than we do that their shareholders will more ask for profit than for ethics. And we know that so far, everywhere there is thinking about artificial intelligence, but there is still little action. Or if we see the Chinese model, this is probably not the one we want to follow. And if we see the American executive order, it shows that even in the United States, the importance of regulation is becoming a topic. But we also know that this executive order is just the beginning of something bigger that has to go through Congress. So I really would like to praise negotiators from the European Parliament, from the Council, and the initiative of the European Commission to dare trying. I'm not sure that the result will be perfect and will last for decades. We probably know that it won't be the case, but we have to start saying what is acceptable, what is high risk, and what is unacceptable. And we should really encourage the dialogue as it took place here in the UK recently to make sure that democracies have their say in something that can be so disruptive that, yes, we have to encourage innovation, but not any kind of innovation. So really, I hope that the next trilogue, which will probably last for the night or at least many hours in the evening in the coming days, will be conclusive, and that other parts of the world will consider trying to go in the same direction, even if we know that you will probably be back working on it in the coming decades.
Thank you very much, Natalie, and it's good to have that contribution from you. We now have Mr. Batty, our Minister for Tech and the Digital Economy from the UK government. Welcome, and if you would make your contribution, that would be great.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Chair. Thank you for that. It's my privilege to join you this morning. I must start by thanking Madame Le Saux and Sir Oliver for inviting me to speak. Today, our continent finds itself facing a growing array of global challenges. Challenges from climate change and supply chain disruption to energy security and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All challenges that no nation can face alone. In this context, a mature and constructive relationship between the UK and the EU, our European friends, rooted in shared values and delivering on shared interests, is as important as ever. A relationship that can deal with our differences, even as we recognise how much we have in common as proud European nations and neighbours. Now that the Windsor Framework has brought clarity and confidence to that relationship, we have an invaluable opportunity to strengthen and deepen our collaboration. One area where that collaboration will be particularly crucial is in my portfolio of artificial intelligence, a technology that, in perhaps more than any other, has the potential to transform our economy and society for the better. Indeed, its immense power can help us to solve some of those challenges I just mentioned, from more powerful and accurate models of climate change to accelerating the discovery and development of life-saving drugs. But if we are to realise those opportunities, then we must also work together to grip the risks that this technology poses. This is vital not only to prevent those risks coming to pass, but also to build public trust in the technology. Those risks are made all the more pressing by challenges including cybersecurity, and we recognise the growing importance of strengthening the cybersecurity of AI systems themselves if we are to reap the benefits they offer for our health, our environment, and our transport. That's why I was particularly pleased that on the 27th of November, we published our new guidelines for secure AI system development, which will help developers of any systems that use AI make informed cybersecurity decisions at every stage of the development process. And close collaboration with the international partners like the EU will be absolutely critical if we are to succeed in driving safe and responsible innovation. And I know this principle is both at the heart of the EU's AI Act and also our AI regulation white paper here in the UK. Because fundamentally, as you all know, AI knows no borders, and nor should our enthusiasm and action to unlock its potential. And that was the same principle which drove the AI Safety Summit last month. This was a landmark event in which the UK brought together a group of 150 world leaders, ministers, businesses, academics and members of civil society from across the globe for crucial talks to explore and build consensus on collective international action to ensure AI safety. And there were 5 key outputs from the summit. Firstly, bringing together the EU and 28 other nations, including China and the US, we signed the Bletchley Declaration on AI Safety, the first ever global agreement on the opportunities and risks of frontier AI and the need to collaborate to unlock them. Secondly, following a request from the Technology Secretary, leading frontier AI organisations, the likes of Amazon, Anthropic, Google, DeepMind, Inflection, Meta and Microsoft OpenAI, they published their own AI safety policies. These formalise their positions on AI safety to share practice, enable important public scrutiny and encourage a race to the top dynamic for all frontier AI developers. Thirdly, after recognising the urgent need for shared international understanding of the technology, attendees and other partners agreed to support the development of an independent State of the Science report. This was led by the Turing Award-winning scientist Joshua Bengio and will facilitate a shared evidence-based understanding of the risks and capabilities associated with frontier AI. Fourthly, several countries and AI companies further recognise the importance of collaboration by agreeing to support state-led testing of the next generation of models before they are released. The UK launched its AI Safety Institute at the summit, which will research and evaluate risks posed by AI systems and will partner with other countries to develop our capabilities and facilitate collaboration between governments in this area. Finally, and to ensure that this conversation can continue at pace, participants have agreed to discuss these issues at the forthcoming AI Safety Summits hosted by the Republic of Korea and, of course, France over the next 12 months, underscoring the positive momentum we've built to drive international action on this critical topic. But I recognise too that the AI Safety Summit is only one part of an interlocking network of international work in this space. And we are proud to support work to drive forward the potential of AI in several international forums, including the Council of Europe, UN, the OECD, the Global Partnership on AI, who are having their summit in Delhi at the moment, and the G7 Hiroshima AI process, which on Friday I met with my G7 counterparts to agree an understanding and a memorandum which will be hopefully signed by our leaders in the coming days. Ahead of the summit, the PM also announced the UK's AI Safety Institute. It's the world's first ever state-backed organisation focused on advanced AI safety for the public interest. It's a momentous achievement, and it's a chance to share internationally the latest research from the frontier of AI and enable an effective global response to its opportunities and risks. To achieve our goal of making the UK a global AI safety hub, the Institute will advance the world's knowledge by carefully examining, evaluating and testing new types of AI, relying on innovation and collaboration to keep it linked to the cutting edge of AI development. This means engaging with a broad audience, from big tech companies to smaller startups, essential to the wider ecosystem, and engaging across industry, academia and civil society. And we built a research team of some of the world's greatest minds, with over 150 years of advanced AI research experience. The Institute will be backed with an annual amount for the rest of this decade and a commitment to harnessing this transformational technology. But aside from this summit and the Safety Institute, we believe the deliberately agile approach to regulation that we've set out in our AI white paper is the right one, and it's able to capture rapid advancement in technologies. We received evidence to our AI regulation white paper consultation from over 350 individuals and organisations across industry, academia, civil society and regulators. Alongside this, we actively sought views across a series of roundtables and technical workshops dedicated to specific topics, including the legal responsibility of AI, the impact of AI on marginalised communities, and also regulator capability. And since publishing the white paper, we've taken rapid steps to implement our regulatory approach. This includes the creation of a central AI risk function within DSIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, to monitor risks, and partnering with the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum to pilot a multi-regulator advisory service that will provide tailored support to innovators. We're going to be publishing our response to the consultation soon, and we've deliberately ensured that it can take into account the outcomes of the AI Safety Institute. Of course, all of this, how we address risk, how we lead a global conversation, how we set the right pro-innovation regulatory framework for the UK, is complemented by continued investment in digital skills. The Academic Accelerator Programme supports academics to get AI ideas out of universities, onto the market and into our lives. It develops academic entrepreneurial skill and ensures that with the support of industry experts, world-leading research translates into products, goods and services that benefit British people. I'd like to finish my opening remarks by emphasising that if we can set the AI game up with the right rules, then we can seize all the benefits of safe and responsible AI, even as we remain agile and responsive to the risks it poses. And that's what I'm looking forward to hearing the Brando's and the room's thoughts on. How do we set up one of the most exciting and challenging games we collectively face? Thank you so much for listening, my friends. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Batty, thank you very much for that insight into the UK government's approach to this issue so far. And it's now time to hear from all of you on the floor. So I'm going to give the floor to members for interventions, and you know the rules by now. It's 2 minutes each to begin with. So I think, Jorgen, you're down to speak again. Do you want to speak again on my speaking list, or I'm assuming you're going to come in at the end? Yes. Okay, so can we go to Beatrice Cavassi?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable colleagues, it is a pleasure and an honour to be here with you today, and indeed to be a member of this Parliamentary Assembly. Artificial intelligence is indeed perhaps, jointly with climate change crisis, one of the most challenging issues we are facing today. And for the good and for the bad, its impacts are very far-reaching, with the potential of affecting billion citizens on this planet. As you know, the European Parliament and the European Union has taken up the challenge of being the first legislator to try to introduce rules on AI. I was supposed at this stage to give you, a roundup of where we stay, but since my colleague has done it so wonderfully, I will not repeat the state of play on AI, just by saying that we wish that tomorrow we will have, a breakout and the last trilogue. But I will do, if you allow me, something rather unconventional. And I will just mention the issues that my daughter, Teresa, whom some of you have met her, has mentioned to me about what is on their mind when they think about AI. She's 12, so spreading misinformation on social media, China's spy balloons, scanners and controlling AI, illegal voice reproduction so that this can make anyone say anything they don't want to say, too much reliance on the internet, the unfettered power of social media influencers, illegal selling of personal information, protecting minors from scams and blackmailing. These are just few things that are on her mind and on her companions' minds, you know, digital natives, when they think about the challenges of AI. And I believe that, dear colleagues, as Member of Parliament, we have a big responsibility of protecting our citizens and to make sure that we take this forward in a way that digital is still a place where human beings can be at the center. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, for bringing a 12-year-old's view. They probably know more about this, a lot of them, than some of us do. Can I now call Lord Kirkhope? Tim.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I just follow on from Madame Kovassi's remarks, because what I want to say in short is this is an area of great interest to me personally. It develops from data issues, and I congratulate my friend Axel Voss on his work in the European Parliament on this. But what I want to say is this. We can come up with all these brilliant ideas for regulation and development and exploitation of AI, but we must never forget people and psychology. I am one of those that's had the mixed effects from traveling in autonomous vehicles on 3 occasions in the United States. It's all very well. We can design anything here and we can develop technology in the way that is being discussed and regulated, but we have to take people with us. We have to give them confidence. We have to employ psychologists and hopefully not too many psychiatrists to try and make sure that people will accept these incredibly fast-moving technologies. That's the one thing I want to get across, and I think it's so important. And the other thing is that we're hopeless as legislators in dealing with these matters. Our Minister has quite rightly stated the advances we're making here in terms of regulation, and Madame Kovassi has mentioned work in the European Parliament and in Europe generally. However, unless we can now start to develop legislation that is smart, we've talked the word dynamic, but it has to be smart and fast-moving. Otherwise, we legislators, who think we know everything, are going to be constantly behind the curve. The AI people are developing faster than we can move, never mind all the various processes of the legislative system. So, we now need to look at a new way of legislating, both in Europe and here, and hopefully working together. This is a matter which is international, and we need to work together on it.
Thank you very much. Now call Colin Markey.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to the speakers from both the UK Parliament and Jorgen from the European Parliament in setting this whole scenario out. I think the last 12 months has taught us all the new, if you like, the like of ChatGPT that has come online the last 12 months has taught people of the power of this technology. I suppose my concern is, at one level, we might, if we don't get the regulation right, we might lose the opportunity in terms of people will step back and look to over-regulate, and we lose the opportunity, the potential that there is in the use of, if you like, big data in terms of research into health, in science in general, and as someone has mentioned, climate change. So I think it's important that, if you like, we underpin the safety side of it, but we ensure that the opportunity is not lost. And the previous speaker mentioned how we have to do this in a dynamic way, and I suppose I would turn back to the speakers and ask them a question in relation to this. How do we effectively work together? How do we make the European continent, which I think is very important, that, like, if you look at Asia, how it will evolve in this area, or you look at America, how it will evolve, we potentially could focus around regulation and then maybe miss the opportunity in terms of evolving with the industry. And I think how we ensure that we are at the forefront of that dynamic change, both from a regulatory perspective and from the opportunity perspective. And I think that is something that we have to get right. So a couple of questions I would have is, how do we work together? How do we make the continent of Europe central to the future of this? And is what we mentioned yesterday in relation to Horizon and the universities, is there potential for a cooperation drove from this institution, if you like, that would allow the UK and Europe work together in this space through the like of Horizon, for instance, to put ourselves at the centre of the direction this would go into the future. I'd ask maybe the two speakers that spoke initially what their thoughts are in relation to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Baroness Mubarak.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to say, first of all, it was good to hear from the Minister a little bit more detail about the Bletchley Park Summit and the Bletchley Declaration. And it's also good to know about the EU's ongoing work on AI and the AI Act, which is very significant. But you know, this is such an important area. We don't really know or understand the full scale of the impact of AI. And in some ways, we've been just pushing full steam ahead without fully understanding the implications. The undesired effects, such as biases and discrimination, false positives, false negatives, loss of privacy, psychological, financial, or physical damage, a decrease in human rights, fake news, use in warfare, and the list goes on. And the use in warfare can be seen in the current conflict in the Middle East. 50 targets identified for strikes in Gaza per annum has become 100 identified per day using AI algorithms with the subsequent devastating loss of life. And those statistics are from the former head of the IDF, Aviv Kochavi. So it is vital that the EU and the UK work together on identifying these ethical issues and ensure that biases are removed. It's about how we develop these smart algorithms. We can't control the number of state actors involved, but the EU and the UK's commitment to work together on policy making, on certification and on governance with ethical standards at the heart of research and development in AI is really, really important and something that we should all fully support.
Thank you. I have no one else from the EU side, so if you oh, okay. Danita.
I thought I was supposed to be on the list, but it doesn't matter. I would like to agree with everybody, actually, first of all, that it is we are talking here about this epochal transformational technology that will change globally, I think, our economies, our security, but also the quality of our life. And I think that there is no reason that we shouldn't just see this stream of work as one of the main streams, one of the most dynamic streams of work between UK and EU in the years to come. But European Union is also in quite deep conversation with United States of America on the AI. We have within the Trade and Technology Council in Lulea at the end of May, we made a decision to establish 3 working groups to cooperate, to work together on the AI, on terminology, taxonomy, on risks, but also on what I think is the most important, on standardization. And if you look at our approaches to the work on AI, they are different. EU is famous, and we are even proud of it, for its hard law, for this very prescriptive regulation, which is hopefully to come to the end tomorrow. So we are looking there at risks, we are looking at technology, we are looking at all the use cases. And in the US, you said there is an executive order signed by the president, but actually, if you look into deeper into the technology, Americans are doing it the other way around. They are just rather following the approach which they can identify among the stakeholders, mostly business community, big tech. And my understanding from what Minister said is that UK is also aiming, after all those phases of consulting and talking, also aiming at a regulatory framework, but we know from your tradition it will be more principle-based regulation probably than this prescriptive. But that also shows that we can, if we cooperate, I'm thinking of those 3 centers on the democratic side of the world, if we work together we can learn learn a lot, and I think we can get a lot of best practices, which were already mentioned today. But I think that what is very important for us, for this work together with UK, is that it must be, I must use the word which normally in UK people are not very supportive of, which is convergence, because I think on standards we need converging. We cannot afford that our businesses will be functioning in different regulatory spaces. I think for this technology, I think it's definitely the need to generate convergence in terms of standardization, and for that, working together, I would like to support what Lord Kirkhope said. Definitely we should work together and create this shared regulatory framework for AI for the future that would take on board everything that you were discussing here so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Baroness Nicholson.
Thank you very much. My comment is really a little bit more of a question to our European Parliament colleague, Juncker. When he commented at the beginning, perfectly understandably and logically, that the European Union was seeking a safe way of coping with artificial intelligence. I come from a background where I did some work making the NASA software safer and the SWIFT banking system safer. And this is a completely different animal. This animal is unsafe. And I wonder if we shouldn't think of it differently. So my question is, are you allowing a more than adequate enough space in your thinking and planning for this unsafe animal which is entering our territory? It will have all sorts of really odd impacts in a sense that we haven't yet thought through. For example, personal privacy is not going to be available, for example. And I just wonder if one shouldn't think of this a different way round.
Thank you very much. Guy Bourgeois.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, in my opinion, the stakes are very high. First of all, for our technological future, hence our prosperity, also for our security. Second, as well, for our values and human rights, and geostrategically. And concerning the first point, human values, I think there's a broad consensus. We have to protect our citizens, our privacy, our children. We have to fight against deepfake and so on. And I subscribe the principles mentioned by our colleague Jorgen in the beginning of his intervention. Concerning investments, there is a dramatic backlog for the EU to the US and China. The last figures I have is that 80% of the private investments in AI are US and China. The EU barely 4%. So I think these figures are very, very clear. So first of all, we have to invest. We have to invest in a smart way, in a targeted way. We have to educate young people, and we have to cooperate. As Lord Kirkhope said, it's a question of working together internationally. So we have to set the standards together with the democratic countries. In my opinion, we should work on these standards in the TTC, Trade and Technology Council with the US, I hope also with the UK, maybe with India too. We have an agreement now with Japan that we can share our data, that we recognize mutually our safety system. And last thing I want to mention is that we should allow also sandboxes and experiment zones, what they are doing in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Baroness Bull.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to jump in, not having been on the list. A couple of questions, really, which were provoked by what the speakers and other speakers have said. We heard from Minister Batty about the need to build public trust. I think one of the challenges is that the better news stories are about the horrors of AI and how often it can go wrong and the negative aspect, whereas actually, you know, in the background, AI is behind some life-changing discoveries, which you mentioned in your comments. So I guess my question is to both of our speakers. How do you balance that dialogue when of course, nobody has control of the narrative now. So what can we do to build public trust in AI, given that our own experiences of AI may be so negative, we've been scammed or whatever it is. And I think the need to build this into early education is really important. We're not brilliant necessarily at digital literacy within education because things move faster than the curriculum can keep up. So how do we ensure that young people are learning about AI when it is moving so quickly? And I guess the other reflection, thinking of Madame Cavassi spoke about voice replication or fake, but deep fakes and the impact of deep fakes on democracy really worries me. You can not only get people to say things, you can get them to look as if they're saying things that they didn't say, and what that's doing to voter trust and democracy really worries me. So I'd be interested to hear speakers reflect on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gunnar Beck.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations. Now, the European Union, we all know, is proposing to save the planet with a share of about 7 or 8% of the world's CO2 emissions. Now, in the sphere of AI, it appears it wants to be at the cutting edge of regulation, but objectively speaking, the EU is lagging far behind the Far East and the United States in developing these technologies. So really, I think its regulation is going to have pretty negligible impact. But maybe I'm wrong, so I'll be interested in anything anyone has to say on that. And then secondly, I'd be very interested in learning about the UK's position here. My suspicion is the UK is probably feels slightly more comfortable with this new technology, and whereas Europe is hopelessly left behind, I suspect the UK will be somewhere in the front row, the second raters in the development of all this. But again, maybe I'm wrong, so I'd like to be illuminated. Thank you.
Thank you for that observation. Helmut Schulz.
Yes, thank you, and thank you all for this very interesting and challenging debate. Just two remarks and maybe also a question to the panelists, the Minister and Jürgen Warborn, my colleague. If we are speaking about the regulatory approach, I think we should now already include in our developing approach to this that in 20 years the African Union will be the most populated continent area on the world. There's a lot of young people today, and that will be kept. The question is, if we are developing a regulatory approach only from the interest of the European Union or from the United Kingdom or the US or China, we are missing. And therefore, I would really insist that we have a more inclusive approach, so that we find, as the Minister said, there is a collective international action for safety of the AI. Or Jürgen has said that the EU AI Act maybe could become the global standard. So do we really think that we are alone are developing the standard, or are we endangered that other centers, inclusive India and China, etc., have the same approach but from their interest? So I want to express that we should now think over how we are organizing this international understanding, so that we are not organizing a confrontation approach in developing a regulatory approach, but that we really need a joint regulatory approach. And I also want to stress that the last remark concerning the digital literacy and the need of developing education in this direction should be part of how we are defining a regulatory mechanism, a standard, which is dealing with these risks and hope and chances bringing technology. Thank you.
And thank you very much. There are no other speakers. So before I bring in our two speakers to respond to some of what they've heard, I think we've had quite a profound debate, which has ranged from the philosophy of regulation in a very fast-moving situation and how we can legislate to keep up and stay ahead of the curve rather than behind it. We've heard geopolitical issues about security and reasonableness in the way in which we develop strategies for regulation and international standards. We know that China has an aim to be very active in this particular area. What are the security implications of some of that? We know also that the EUA Act bans some uses such as robot soldiers and facial recognition technology, which won't be banned in Russia or China. So there are some security implications of that if we absent ourselves from doing that. It's not very nice, but it's something we have to think about. And obviously also underlying many of the comments today were thoughts about how we can make our economies more productive by positive use of AI, as America is clearly doing, because the productivity gains are potentially vast. There's a good and a bad side to this technology, and I think people have been wrestling with that in the contributions that they've made. So what I'm going to do is, after making those observations, just bring you back in, Minister Batty, to make your responses, and then I'll bring in Mr. Warburn.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Chair, for those reflections. And thank you for all your contributions today and choosing to focus on such a key topic, one which truly crosses national borders. And I can attest that when the Prime Minister asked me to take on this role 3 weeks ago, I was very excited because while there are clearly huge risks, there are also massive opportunities, and I hope to unpack that in some of my reflections and in response to some of the comments. But one thing is completely evident to me, is that on AI, we have to, and we can and we must work together as like-minded partners to the challenges of our time. Science, innovation and technology offer us incredible opportunities to shape a future that reflects our shared values, to grow the economy, to create jobs and deliver tangible benefits to our peoples, helping them to live longer, happier, healthier lives. The future starts with, of course, openness and engagement, and this forum is a great example of that. So this Assembly has a critical role to play in making our shared mission a success, deepening and broadening the relationship between the UK and the EU through a constructive dialogue between our parliamentarians. I just wanted to reflect on some of the comments made, and I'll go straight into, I guess, the issue of the day, which is around regulation and our approach. And our approach is very clear, which is we don't feel we should be in a rush to regulate for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because as one of the speakers said, our approach is, I think it's fair to say, it is a principled approach, because our economy has always, our approach to the economy has always been to encourage innovation, which in our view brings benefits for the most part. But secondly, and most importantly actually around this, it's very hard to regulate something if you don't fully understand it. And I think that is really goes to the crux of what we are talking about in our white paper. The regulation, we feel, should be based on empirical evidence, and that's why we think we're taking the right approach, which is to invest heavily, and more so than anyone else, in developing the capabilities in government to understand that risk. That's why the AI Safety Institute, and I know there were comments made about trust, which I'll reflect on, why the AI Safety Institute is so important, because we do need to understand the risks. And if they manifest themselves, we will be in a far better place to figure out what is the appropriate action to take at that moment. And when you're dealing with something so fast-moving and not fully understood, even by the people who are developing the technology themselves, it's hard to say what the right way to regulate it is. The UK has already invested a substantial amount of money in the technology to the tune of around £2.5 billion since 2014. And £100 million has been set aside for the task force, which represents a more dedicated funding to AI safety. Our AI workforce now is in excess of 50,000 people, but we need to, of course, continue as a country to focus on attracting the best talent. And the government already is providing workers and students with the right skills with AI to ensure our homegrown talent pool remains as strong as possible. And we're already seeing that approach vindicated with the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic choosing the UK as the base for their bases. The sector already contributes around £3.7 billion to our economy, and it attracted last year around £4.2 billion in investment. And for me, someone mentioned digital skills. I think that is the game in town, apart from the question around regulation. And the government's focus on upskilling people to work with AI to ensure that nobody is left behind as we lean into the opportunities that this technology brings, in my view, is the right one. Because with the right rules in place, the UK is harnessing the power of safe AI to bring growth, stronger growth, better jobs, and bold new discoveries. It should be noted that those with non-routine vocations, such as plumbers or electricians, I think someone talked about taking people with you, which I'm a big advocate of throughout my political life. But when you talk about plumbers or electricians, I would reflect that there's always been, as new technologies have come into force, whether it's the automobile or the computer, worrying about jobs. And clearly that's why I believe in the value of upskilling. And I don't believe that they should worry about their jobs being automated. And I think that's the same with cutting-edge artists or writers, because automation cannot mimic those kind of specific skills in the same way it can't replace the heat of decision-making. AI could transform jobs which require routine cognitive skills or routine physical labour. There are also parallel growth opportunities there too. So my view is that we push on educating our population to take up more challenging pursuits that will supercharge the economy as much as the technology will. There was a question around how AI will impact the lives of everyday people. And the truth is, I think it was Baroness Bull, she's reflected on this, which is it's already doing that. It's already changing the way we live and work for the better. It's behind many of the products that we have in our day-to-day lives, including how streaming services recommend TV shows and films, how our navigation systems work, and how they work out the fastest routes, and how our email services filter out spam. And the latest advances are, of course, taking a step further. AI is already starting to unlock some of the biggest opportunities in the world, such as discovering new superbug-killing antibiotics. Our National Health Service is already running trials for AI to help clinicians to identify breast cancer sooner. And AI, of course, in the workplace can help free us up from routine tasks, leaving teachers with more time to teach and police officers with more time on the beat. And we are committed to seizing those opportunities to improve lives with better, more efficient public services. But of course, there is still much more to learn about AI's potential. And we need to know that approach so that we can regulate industry as it evolves and as technology evolves too. And before I move on to international forum, because there was a conversation around how we engage with the EU and other bodies, I suppose one reflection I would make, Chair, is that over a year ago, I'm not even sure ChatGPT was a thing that was being discussed, and now it's a key part of our lexicon, which just goes to show how quickly this technology is evolving. There was Mr. Markey, I think it was, who reflected on engagement and how we collaborate. Well, as I said, we are part of the forum, which are discussing these conversations at the Council of Europe, at the OECD, the Global Partnership on the AI, at the UN, and the G7 Hiroshima AI process was a good example of that on Friday. And of course, I'd like to put on record my welcoming of the Italian presidency of the G7. Someone mentioned earlier about democracy. Please forgive me if I don't mention the name. I did note it down. But democracy and elections. I think this is a very, very valid point, and you will hear me talking about this in the House of Commons regularly. It is an important aspect of this debate, because I think I think I saw a stat, something over 75% of the world's population will be going to elections next year. It is a crucially vital point, and we as a government are looking at that. We have the Defending Democracy Task Force, which I'm a member of, and we'll be looking at the role that certainly social media will play on that. And I know Baroness Mubarak indicated that as well. Just to reflect on our relationship with the European Union, and let me be unequivocal about this. I think on fields like this, as we've seen in Horizon, in science and tech, a close relationship with the EU is critical to our ambitions, our collective ambitions. We recognise the flagship legislation such as the AI Act, the CHIPS Act, the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, has wide-ranging repercussions for the global digital economy, with implications for the UK science and technology policymaking and UK industry as well. And we've had regular and welcome engagement with the EU Commission, and I hope that continues. And of course, important elements of that have included the UK Association to Horizon Europe and Copernicus, and of course the success of the AI Safety Summit. And we want to capitalise on the momentum of the UK Association and the AI Safety Summit, especially where the EU is similarly pushing a live and active agenda. And I welcome France hosting the summit later next year. The only other reflection I had is that we will also work closely with our international partners, with the UK's AI Standards Hub, to ensure that our overall approach to AI governance is informed by emerging best practice, and international research on AI relies on safety and reliability. I think the contribution from Ms. Danita talked about our principles. I think she's right. Our focus is on being technology neutral. It is not about a market-driven approach. It is about forward-looking, because, of course, as we all know, as legislators, by the time legislation happens, fields like AI will have surpassed even that. So the challenge to all of us, and the balance we have to achieve, is a regulatory framework which encourages innovation, which recognises the risks and protects our society, but doesn't stifle that innovation. Because, my friends, AI is coming, it's already here, and it's developing. I think, Baroness Bull, you talked about dialogue and conversation, and positive engagement like this is hugely, hugely important. And I think the first, I think, Beatrice, you talked about your daughter, and thank you so much for sharing that personal reflection. I too have young children, and everything I do now, I think about the world for them. And clearly we want to have a framework and an environment which is conducive to them living in safety. It is not without challenge, but the only way we overcome that challenge is working together, sharing that best practice, and having open and welcome dialogue. So I thank you all for being part of this conversation and for taking such an interest in a huge part of my portfolio. It's something the Prime Minister is personally very invested and interested in, and it's a part of our futures. And I wish you well for the rest of your plenary sessions, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
And now I would like to invite Mr. Warburton to speak, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very good conversation, and thanks for all your comments and questions. I have tried to group them into 4 themes. First, something about the narrative when it comes to AI. Then I'd like to say something about trust, education, and research. Then I'll go over to regulation, and I'd end with our cooperation that I hope we will have on this topic. First, on the narrative. I'm on the positive side of AI. I think we have great potential using AI to solve some of our most important societal issues, not least climate change. We can fight terrorism. We had the argument of or discussion on facial recognition, and that is not sorted in the European Parliament and in the negotiations with the Council. I tend to be on the side that for finding terrorists, we should also use facial recognition. The Parliament's majority is not. I think we have fantastic opportunities of how we can use AI for healthcare, and some examples was mentioned by the Minister. There is also, of course, a productivity gain that is huge. And we need that in Europe. We are falling behind when it comes to competitiveness. And from a business point of view, there is really not a choice, because AI will be there, and our competitors will use it, and we, of course, have to, and we should use it. I learned that out of the 100 biggest AI companies in the world, only 4 are Europeans. So we seem to have a problem here. We could do better when it comes to this. But there is also a problem with the labor market, and let's recognize that. World Economic Forum, they stated, they came with an estimate, I think it was half a year ago, that as a result of AI in the entire world, we will lose 83 million jobs. They also said, on the good side, that 69 million jobs will come, but there is still a net loss of 14. And I think that we have to be on the positive side, so that our part of the world rather is part of the 69 and not the 83, meaning that we gain from this. And that makes me come into the second part, which is trust, education, and research. Because I guess you remember, colleagues, also probably 6 months ago, there was a call from some business leaders that you should stop developing AI. There should be a pause. I never believed in that at the time, and of course it didn't happen. If we would have agreed to stop in Europe, in UK, and maybe in US, I'm sure, or I'm not so sure that China would have stopped. And let's be clear that we don't really understand everything about AI, but that means that we need more research, not less. So we should intensify AI research. And from a European perspective, I think we need to pool our resources into research so that we not only learn more, but that we also come ahead and create new business models, new ways of applications of solving all these big issues that we have, that I mentioned, climate, terrorism, healthcare, and the rest. But it's not only research at a higher level, it's also a matter of informing and educating small businesses, students, pupils in the schools, of course, and I also have a 17-year-old son. He is using ChatGPT. He thinks it's a fantastic tool to cheat with its homeworks. And of course it is. And I think we also have, in a sense, rethink our educational system and create other assignments that, because you cannot stop students from using these powerful technologies, and you shouldn't, because that's the way how they learn how to use the technology. That also, in the long term, builds trust. When you understand it better, you trust it. Let me go over to regulation, my third part. I'm not really sure that we are doing it the right way in the European Union, to be honest. We have decided, or the Commission decided, to put forward a horizontal AI regulation, meaning that we regulate AI. I think it would be much better if we identified all the challenges that we have, and we do have them, like privacy, like product safety issues, like discrimination due to how the data sets are composed. But I think we rather should have regulated on those specific sectors, not horizontal. So if we have a problem with product safety, let's go into a product safety law and update that to AI. If we have a problem with discrimination, let's update our law on discrimination. Because what we do at the moment is, first of all, when you regulate AI, you send a signal that this is something really dangerous and we have to regulate it. You could have come to the same conclusion with doing it sectorial. And, Minister, you also said, in a sense, that you are not in a rush here. You are a bit you're waiting, you see the risks, and you try to find ways of mitigate those risks, but not regulate the entire AI. And I also think that it was mentioned by some of the other speakers that, I mean, we have to do this in a smart way, to regulate smart, because we will be constantly behind. And that is, of course, true. I guess, I mean, from that, we started the negotiations in the Parliament to when we maybe ended tomorrow, ChatGPT came up in between. That just goes to show how hard it is to regulate horizontally a technology that develops so rapidly. And I heard, I don't know if it's true, that when Obama was the president, he called for some advisors to look into this AI thing and see if we should regulate it. And apparently they came back to him and said, Mr. President, we shall not regulate AI. We should, of course, very cautiously look at all the risk there is and mitigate those, but not a horizontal regulation. And I still think that that is how it will end up with the US. That's on the regulation part. Let's go on the last part. And yeah, on the business side, ask for regulation. That is absolutely true. I think they do, because they, of course, need some guidance in this and understand. And in order to build trust, they need this, of course, as well. And we have to do that. But it's, of course, depending on how you do it. Last part, how can we work together? And as you know, and it was mentioned, the European Union worked with the US in the TTC, the Trade and Tech Council. We have a number of working groups there, and one of them is on artificial intelligence. I think that is very good that we come together with the US on those issues. But I also think that we should work even closer with the UK. And I hope that we can use the PPA in the future to discuss these issues even more, because I'm quite sure that they will be centerpiece for our discussions, the global discussions on safety, but also on productivity and how we solve big societal issues. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, our two main speakers, and all those who made observations about what is obviously a subject I suspect we'll be coming back to time and time again. What I'd like to do now is hand the floor to Madame Loiseau for the next item on the agenda. Floor is yours, Natalie.
Well, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the report from the breakout groups. And I will switch to my mother tongue. So I'll give you just a few seconds to grab your headphones. Comme vous le savez, nous avons...
As you know, yesterday we organized 3 informal discussion groups on matters in the news. You've all received a document for this meeting, and it should be sent to the Partnership Council to ask it to put forward observations on key points identified by the different groups. It's important to note that the plenary is not being asked to approve the points raised in the letter, since we said at each meeting that these points do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the plenary or of the delegations. However, we would like to find out the opinion of the Partnership Council on these different issues. I shall therefore ask the chairs of each of the discussion groups to give us a brief summary of their session. I'll start with Lord Ricketts, who's going to talk about the informal discussion group on fisheries. Thank you.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you.
This was an interesting challenge because I'm sure I was the person in the room who knew least about fisheries policy. But undaunted, we had a very lively and useful discussion, I think. We benefited from contributions from members of the Welsh Senate, Scottish Parliament, Northern Ireland Assembly, and the Committee of the Regions. And we agreed early on in the discussion that fisheries have always been contested, are now, and will continue to be so, but that there were some issues which could be dealt with pragmatically in the short term before the end of the current regime in June 2026. These were the issues affecting Irish and Northern Irish fishing communities, and they would help to build confidence if they could be resolved in the shorter term. They affected a long-standing issue of access to Northern Ireland and Irish vessels to respective territorial waters, and a specific concern about the fact that Northern Ireland vessels bringing catch to Northern Ireland ports could technically be treated as third country vessels for customs purposes. Our second point was that there needs to be a strategic approach to managing the fisheries post-2026. It needs to be dealt with on its merits and not linked to other areas of policy, sufficiently complicated in itself. We felt there should be a multi-annual approach beyond 2026, as there has been set out in the TCA, to give some certainty to fishing communities with mechanisms to adjust as the science shows the changes in stocks. So shorter-term adjustment processes within a strategic framework. There was a lot of stress in the group on the importance of a sustainable fisheries management on the basis of a collaborative approach, including local communities, and a lot of emphasis on that, the importance of regions, communities, fishing communities being part of the discussion that leads to policy decisions. That also needs to take account of issues which are potentially cutting across that, environmental protection and the development of offshore energy infrastructure, such as the wind farms that are vital for energy policy. Last point, we were told that the EU and the UK should share a common interest in coordinating our approach to negotiations with other fishing nations. We were told, for example, that there were examples of other fishing nations who set unilateral quotas that went significantly beyond the agreed total allowable catches. That was something the EU and the UK should coordinate on. Overall, Madam Chairman, I was very impressed by the forward-looking and problem-solving approach of all the participants in this perennially difficult area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to myself as the chair of the Breakout Group on Citizens' Rights. I think I can say that our discussion was extremely consensual and fruitful. First, to acknowledge and welcome the good progress made on the situation of EU nationals living in the UK and British nationals living in the EU. We could have feared, when we looked at the withdrawal agreement, that it would trigger a lot of bureaucracy and many difficulties, considering the scope of the populations at stake. And we have to welcome the fact that for the very vast majority of our fellow citizens on both sides, things went smoothly. This is precisely what we as parliamentarians were looking at. Our role, of course, is to always be vigilant to the situation of our fellow citizens. And in general, things went smoothly, but we want to make sure that the most vulnerable part of the population, both the EU citizens living in the UK and British citizens living in the EU, are fully taken on board. We welcome the ruling of the High Court helping people who only have pre-settled status and postponing the final decision on their situation. But we insist that there is some sort of monitoring of the way this decision is implemented, because we know that it basically includes people who don't have a lot of digital literacy, people who have lived for years in this country and might not exactly understand why they should give evidence of the fact that they were living here. So more needs yet to be done to make sure that nobody is left aside. As regards British nationals living in the EU, sorry, we talked about people residing or traveling to the EU for short periods, and we are calling for member states to exchange good practices so that border management officials do have the same sort of practices everywhere in the European Union. There is satisfaction with the way things are taking place, but there are still some difficulties that could be avoided if there was more exchanges on this. And of course, information and communication towards British nationals is always necessary so that people don't face difficulties at the last minute when they want to travel or when they want to go back to their residence in Europe, for instance. As regards civil society organization working with citizens, we know how strongly they lobbied for citizens' rights during the negotiation of the withdrawal agreement. They can still be of help to identify communities away from information. So we consider that support both from the Commission and from the British government would be welcome for these civil society organizations to help identify and solve problems. And then we could hardly avoid talking about touring artists, even if it's within the recommendation of our plenary. And once again, pushing for exchange of good practices and for more information, more communication towards people willing to, I would say, embody this cultural link between the UK and the EU and make sure that even if things are different from what they were before, people who want to travel with their creative industry company have the appropriate information and find their way throughout the member states or when they want to come to the United Kingdom as well. So a lot of more improved communication, more monitoring, and making sure that either the most vulnerable or the youngest citizens do have our full support, because nothing was designed to make exchange of people or people leaving in another country more difficult. That's it for me, I think. And now I give the floor to Damangela for the breakout groups on data protection.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And there are connections between the debate we've just had on AI and some of the debates that we had in this particular breakout group, because obviously data is really fuel for AI, and you can't really have the one without the other, so the connections are obvious. We looked at the current principles that lay behind existing and shared law on data, and that's obviously the GDPR. And we thought that the 7 principles that were established when that regulation was put into effect were still reasonable. That's lawfulness, fairness, transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, and citizens' redress. But we also felt that they may have to be tweaked as AI comes more to the fore, but we thought they were good principles to work from. We had a good discussion about the economic arguments and noted, as has been said in our last debate, that we're lagging behind the US and other regions in economic growth in fast-growing digital markets, and that we had to do something which enabled us to take the best opportunities that are available for economic growth in that very important area. We had quite a detailed discussion on the adequacy decisions that are coming up with the UK Data Protection and Digital Information Bill and the EU structures. And I think there was some reassurance, which will have to be proved as we go forwards with the changes that have been made to our bill in its recent passage through Parliament. It's still got to go to the House of Lords, and any changes there, I suspect, will probably make it better rather than worse. That's just a personal opinion, but I think that that will be what happens. But we are all, all sides of the working group were seized of the importance of getting that right for future cooperation. We then also had a good debate, again, which surfaced in the AI debate on the essential importance of taking action to protect our democracies from misinformation, interference, deep fakes, and all the malign potential that are involved in some of this, but also misuse of mass data in particularly the next year, where we noted the number of elections that are pending and the bad actors, if I could put it that way, which may well be attempting to manipulate the responses of those. And our conclusions asked the Partnership Council, through the Partnership Council, to share intelligence and information between us so that we can try to minimise this risk. And we also felt that we needed to reach common ground, equivalence or more, about how we move forward with the approaches to personal data protection as this area rapidly evolves. Thank you, Chair.
So, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much to the chairpersons of our breakout groups. I'm going to ask the plenary now to approve the letter that you received being sent to the Partnership Council so that it may make its comments. If everybody agrees, I'd like to thank you. And I think I'm going to be talking about the next item now on the agenda, which is on climate change, including the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We're going to hear from our guest speakers, bearing in mind that one of them is still stuck at security, if I've understood correctly. But first of all, I'm going to give the floor to hear about the current situation within the Partnership Council and European legislation to Thijs Ruijten, who's representing the European Parliament.
There? Yeah, you can come to the podium.
Thank you, Chair. And it's a great honor for me to have been asked to sit here as member of our Assembly. It is also comes with a warning because I'm not a climate or energy transition expert. But I followed the landmark legislation on CBAM closely through my colleague Mohammed Shahim, who was rapporteur on behalf of the Parliament. And after all, the climate change challenge and the energy transition are not the sole responsibility of experts in that field. As has been discussed already yesterday in other sessions, the geopolitical dimension, the link with migration, and simply the livelihood security makes it imperative to act jointly and preferably, in particular, with like-minded jurisdictions, just as ours. And also the Lord Speaker earlier this morning referenced to the fact that climate change is a topic too big for us alone to solve. I read an article the other day about the problem of availability of reliable energy supply in the UK, threatening businesses' viability, being a motivation and driver for energy transition. It had to do with renewable energy, but in a very different way than you might think now. I will get back to this at the end of my intervention. Industries understand and want the transition. And the good news is we have the technology and there are business models behind it. And industries have already innovated and have used that technology, but we have to work to accelerate towards meeting the targets, and that will amplify also future innovation in clean tech. And we, in Europe, the UK and the EU alike, will be able to lead in that innovation, because our scientists, industries, and the technological industries understand the impact and the necessity, because there will not be a future without a transition to fossil-free for our industries. And industries also supported the Green Deal in the European Union. Maybe better than some politicians, industries understand sometimes why it is important to have the legislation in place, preferably at an early stage, so that they can adapt. Because they also know, as we do, that not acting now will only make acting later harder and more expensive. And one of the ways we started on CO2 reduction was the ETS, the trading scheme. 15 years of working with the ETS helped us to reduce CO2 with 24% while having 60% growth over relevant sectors. And this includes the UK, because the UK was part of the ETS. ETS now has been replaced in the UK by an UK ETS. But it shows, the working with ETS has shown that green growth is not only necessary, but is also possible. And the ETS provides us with empirical evidence that it is not a myth. It works and it can be amplified by green technologies. But in the next 15 years, we have to accelerate. What types of jobs do we need? How do we make sure our industries who want this transition can also do this while being protected against unfair competition, with a level playing field without competitors importing products where the CO2 impact has not been taken into account? And that is where CBAM comes in. ETS is based on polluter pays principle, and CBAM is a logical step on top of ETS. And we introduced free allowances in the ETS at the same time to remain competitive with industry outside the EU. But CBAM is adding to that, because how does it work? The EU introduced it as an extension of the EU emission trading system, because producers are required to pay for their CO2 emissions using a cap and trade system. However, to mitigate the potential carbon leakage, most companies receive a free allocation of allowance. As I said, to remain competitive, we did that. And CBAM was introduced by the EU to replace these free allowances gradually, and also with the objective to address the obstruction posed by these free allowances to real decarbonization, and at the same time allowing companies to emit CO2 without cost stands in the way of progress. So if you want other regions to mirror the standards that we want, you need the CBAM. CBAM will be implemented in combination with a phase out of the free allowances. And the biggest complaints so far have been coming from regions without an ETS, which is logical because they would be faced with the biggest consequences of the CBAM. But as I said, the only way to make others maintain similar standards is by trying to mirror our own standards on them. Do you want to enter our market? Good, we are an open economy. And if you have your own ETS, excellent, because we can take that into account. But we need you to account for the CO2 footprint in order to protect also our industries that are innovating towards a decarbonized, fossil-free energy supply. So if we agree that future is fossil-free and thus the industry has to be decarbonized, we also need that, that instrument. In the UK, a couple of weeks ago, there has been an interesting debate, and I was handed this by Baroness Crowley. So I'm very interested to hear also, especially from the UK side, how their views are on the CBAM, possibly joining CBAM, like also other jurisdictions are considering, even in the US, but maybe also doing a similar piece of legislation. I think the only way to survive for our industries long term is fully decarbonized, not only because of the business model, but also because we are exceeding our planetary boundaries, that we are making the planet unlivable for future generations, and also shining a whole different light on income security and livelihood subsistence. To end with this introduction, Chair, I will come back to the example I gave in the beginning, because this was an example of lack of availability of reliable energy supply threatening businesses' viability, being a motivation and driver for energy transition from the mid-19th century in Britain. Because after decades of the Industrial Revolution being driven by water power, there was increasing lack of this water power, and the combination of ever-increasing demand and the exhaustion of water power and periods of drought arguably drove the transition to coal power. So it was a totally different driver of the transition, but in a way it is similar, because we are facing an exhaustion of or instability of energy resources, and we also have reasons to stop with the fossil fuel, but we need to find another way of creating that stable energy supply. Thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome Marina Skriner, the Director, International Net Zero Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and I'll give her the floor immediately.
Merci, thank you very much. And thank you all for inviting me to be here today. It's a real pleasure, especially in such a grand setting. And apologies, because it is such a grand setting, I got stuck behind a procession, which is why I missed the first few words you said, but it was very interesting. Thank you. So my name is Marina Skriner. I'm Director of International Net Zero Energy and Trade at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. Minister Stewart spoke to you last year, I know, and would have loved to have been here today, but he is at COP. Today, indeed, is Energy Day at COP. So it's the right place for him to be. But I thought I would start there. So the UK and EU have always worked very closely together on multilateral fora and on climate specifically, and COP28 is absolutely no different. We are very much aligned in our drive to keep 1.5 degrees and the Paris Agreement in its full state within reach. This alignment is further demonstrated by, for example, our co-leadership of the Just Energy Transition Partnership with Vietnam, and of course our shared vision for the global stocktake at COP28, and, as you were saying, an ambitious outcome on fossil fuel phase-out. This year we have also endorsed the global pledge to triple renewable energy deployment and double energy efficiency improvements by 2030. I'll come back to this later because I see real opportunity there in how we can turn this pledge into action through how we work together under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. I, like you here, will be very interested to see how the outcomes from COP, to see what they are, and then consider how the UK and EU can continue to work together to work positively on this agenda. So I'm going to say a few words about our net zero ambitions, how we can work together on the North Seas, the energy title within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and then I'll also cover carbon leakage a little bit, as my colleague has. As I said, climate is an area of shared interest, and we all here have very ambitious strategies and plans in place. In the UK, we remain absolutely committed to delivering net zero by 2050, and the government has outlined an ambitious, yet pragmatic and realistic vision for how we will meet that challenge while ensuring clean, affordable, and secure energy. In March, we set out our plan for making this transition in a package of documents called Powering Up Britain, the Net Zero Growth Plan. And that was trying to demonstrate our whole economy approach to decarbonisation, because it doesn't sit within just one sector alone. The announcements in this plan continue to demonstrate UK leadership in securing the economic benefits of the energy transition, including through major investments in new technologies such as CCUS, carbon capture, usage and storage. And then in the recent autumn statement, we set out £960 million worth of funding for the Green Industries Growth Accelerator for clean energy manufacturing, and we accepted 43 recommendations from a recent Windsor review, which is really aiming to enhance the connection of renewables to our national grid, really focusing on this point of delivering our ambitions. Obviously, as has happened across Europe, UK energy strategy has developed significantly over the recent years, influenced obviously by our ambitions through the Climate Change Act, but also our commitment to decarbonise the power sector by 2035, subject obviously to security of supply considerations, and then of course Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent energy crisis. We want this rapid shift that we need to make to clean energy generation and obviously greater energy efficiency, and we think it will provide the most effective route to ensuring both climate and energy security, and it helps avoid some of those risks associated with the dependency on fossil fuel imports. But we cannot achieve this in isolation. It's one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here today. All of our international relationships, particularly those with our close partners, are crucial to achieving our domestic and global objectives. Turning more towards the opportunities of cooperating in the North Seas, for us in this room today, I really feel like the North Seas, this cooperation is where it's most important. And it brings me back to the point I made earlier on our COP Global Pledge on Renewables. The Ostend Summit set out a really bold vision of what our cooperation in the North Seas could achieve. We've got a joint commitment between the UK and our neighbours to deploy 120 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And we've only got 30 gigawatts today, so it's a really huge ambition over quite a relatively short period of time. Our Prime Minister is committed to realising this potential of the North Seas, and we are really eager to work together to deliver the commitments. For example, I was with Minister Stewart in The Hague only 2 weeks ago at the North Seas Energy Cooperation Ministerial, where all the North Seas ministers endorsed the NSEC action agenda for next year. You will have seen that this action agenda focuses on delivering offshore wind and supply chains, financing, building towards an integrated energy system, while also obviously considering the environmental impact, and we were really happy to endorse it. But Minister Stewart's key message to our friends all across the North Seas was about maximising the opportunities and the urgency of beginning to now deliver on our ambitions. We need regulatory frameworks that encourage investment. We need to make sure the benefits and the costs of the projects that will make it happen are shared fairly between developers in all the connecting countries. We also need to develop efficient UK-EU electricity trading arrangements to maximise the benefits that will accrue to both the UK and EU consumers. The reward for overcoming these challenges, which are complex, is that we will be able to turn the North Seas into our desired green power plant of Europe, not only looking at offshore wind, but also technologies such as hydrogen and CCUS. The UK has considerable expertise and knowledge in developing offshore wind and interconnection, and we can build on that together. We're keen to share our expertise with our NSEC partners and play a full part in the work streams, for example, by developing efficient electricity trading arrangements. That brings me neatly on to the energy title under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And again, at this ministerial a few weeks ago, Minister Stewart stated how important it is that we deliver the energy commitments that we have made in the TCA. And I know that this is important to this group Earlier this year, the co-chairs of this PPA sent the chairs of the Partnership Council a recommendation for further energy cooperation between the two parties. And that was further reaffirmed in March at the Partnership Council, and we thank you all for your recommendation. There are significant mutual benefits to the energy cooperation, and we have been disappointed by the lack of progress, particularly in developing new trading arrangements. We think it's imperative that we see real progress on energy title implementation before the next Partnership Council in 2024. Very quickly, just to cover carbon leakage, we have, like you, recognised the importance of carbon leakage policy and of taking measures that decarbonise our industrial sectors. That's why earlier this year we published a consultation on addressing our carbon leakage risks to support our decarbonisation ambitions. And this consultation closed this autumn, and we will respond in due course, and we will publish a response very shortly. So I will conclude there to be nice and quick, but thank you very much for letting me be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion.
Thank you. Dear Sir Oliver, do you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Natalie. As we face elections in the coming year, one of the challenges which we all share is to have solid policies which do tackle climate change, but at the same time to maintain public support and arrange that balance which is so important between the economic interests of our constituents and taking account of the effect of inflation and the problems with the energy crisis which we've had, but at the same time still continuing to tackle climate change effectively. And one of the things that this Assembly has done is to point to some examples of how we might progress with that. And so in the Energy Breakout group which we had in July, there was a discussion about carbon capture and storage, and it was suggested that in Britain we do have a lot of capacity in the North Sea for storage, which isn't true to the same extent in the EU. And so I think one of the things which the MEPs have now been taking up, with Svetlina here well to the fore, is arguing that it should be possible for the EU to consider using third country storage facilities. So I mean that's something which has come up from our discussions, which I think is useful. We also agreed our recommendation at our second meeting on energy cooperation and electricity trading, and we made a strong recommendation, and I rather agree that progress has been a bit too slow. And the significance of that is that, of course, the case for investment in renewables and deployment in the North Sea does depend, to some extent, on getting those electricity trading arrangements in place. So I think we do need to make sure that happens. And then finally on CBAM, I think it's a very important thing that the UK CBAM and the CBAM within the EU, that they should work closely together so that we can have something that's coherent. So just a few comments.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais maintenant donner la parole.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give the floor now to the members of Parliament for 2 minutes each. I might have to reduce that speaking time if there are lots of you wishing to take the floor, but I hope that won't be the case.
Ricketts.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Madam Chairman. Thank you to our two speakers. This is specifically an agenda item on climate and the CBAM, and it's worth noting the TCA includes a commitment to maintain our climate mitigation policies. We're both committed to net zero in 2050. And we both have very ambitious shorter-term carbon reduction targets. So we're very well aligned in the area of ambition. The UK, of course, was part of the EU emission trading system until Brexit. Then we set up a very similar one on our own account, and for a long time the carbon prices were similar. We recommended in our Lords EU committee that the UK government should explore a link between the two ETS systems, based perhaps on the precedent of the EU-Switzerland model, which preserves Swiss sovereignty on the design of their ETS. Because of changes in UK government policy on carbon credits for industry, there is now a significant divergence in the prices of carbon in the EU and the UK. Last time I looked, it was around €70 and £37. And our committee several months ago saw risks that if the prices diverged, then there could be a real problem given the EU plans for a CBAM. It raises the prospect, a very unattractive one, of an EU tax on certain British exports or a carbon tariff on UK-produced electricity. So I'd be particularly interested in what Marina can say about our plans for ensuring good coordination between the two ETS schemes to avoid problems on the CBAM level.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Sean Kelly.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody. I've enjoyed the discussions today and yesterday, and thanks, Lord Oliver, for your hospitality. Now, in relation to this topic, firstly, we can say that while Brexit happened, it was never going to happen in relation to energy because of all the interconnectors between us. We weren't going to close them down, and particularly in relation to my own country, without the interconnector at Moffat, our energy security would not be guaranteed. We're almost dependent 75% for our gas coming from the UK. So obviously cooperation is very important. Now we do have a problem though, Lord Rickett referred to it, that is in relation to ETS and carbon pricing. And particularly because I think the British government have pushed out the date for elimination of gas and diesel from 2030 to 2035 and a 9-year delay in gas boilers. So as a result, the carbon price in the United Kingdom has reduced to £36, about half the EU average, and it would need to be £97 to incentivise businesses. So as my colleague Mr. Rutten said, how does the EU deal with that? CBAM, unfortunately, would be the answer. And that would not be very pleasant, but would be necessary to get a level playing field, because you would need an equivalent carbon price, or else you'd have to pay carbon import taxes. And that means, in one way, firstly, that the taxes which should be going to the United Kingdom government would be going into the EU. That wouldn't be very pleasant for many, because the United Kingdom power would be cheaper than the EU. So CBAM will charge the difference between the UK and the EU. And I think that is something we need to look at. We have the same ambitions, we were not moving at the same pace. And that's not a criticism, because being involved in energy files in the European Union, a lot of member states are wonderful in terms of expressing their desire to reach the 1.5% and above all a target for 2050. But when it comes to actually doing things in the short term, they say no. Now some of that is genuine because of the war in Ukraine, affecting competitiveness, cost of living, etc. So I think it's very important for us as a PPA to see how we can avoid this clash, which is going to happen, which won't be very pleasant if there's going to be a totally different price in the ETS in the UK and the EU, and then how it's going to affect trading between us. I think we possibly could be the vehicle by which we might be able to bridge that gap and eliminate that conflict. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Lord Jefferson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm been very proud of the UK's track record on climate change. It just seems a pity that through very minor adjustments, maybe for political purposes, we seem to have given the message to the rest of the world that we're actually going backwards, and hopefully that is not the case. In terms of CBAM, that's what I'd like to talk about, as others have. It is an irony to me to a degree that a lot of the academic and papers that looked at carbon leakage in the past actually said that carbon pricing was actually not a real problem, in that having carbon pricing in the UK and EU as it was then was not putting off trade. Now, that might now change because carbon prices are getting higher. But what I would say is don't expect this to be a silver bullet. Other issues in terms of international trade, labour costs, certain taxation, non-carbon energy costs are going to be a problem. This is not a silver bullet. I also would like to ask the panellists, if we look back 10 years, then when we tried to include international aviation into the EU ETS, we had a huge reaction from China, from the United States, from the rest of the global community, which in the end stopped that from ever happening. The EU backed off. When we were part of the EU at the time, we backed off the carbon pricing at that time. So this is still seen by many as a trade restriction, and I wonder where we are in terms of World Trade Organization and reaction from the rest of the world. I'd be very interested to hear that. One last plea. Yes, the North Sea is incredibly important, but strangely enough, the UK has an EU member to the west of us as well, and represented here, and I think that cooperation in the Celtic Sea should be equally important. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next speaker is Svetlana Penkova.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone. Oliver already gave away some of the things I was about to touch upon. But if you allow me, I'll just say a few words on the development on the Net Zero Industry Act. We had it voted in the Parliament in November already, in the plenary hall, and now we are in the middle of the trialogues. We're going to be starting them actually next week. There is a very strong commitment that this legislation should be finalized in the course of the next couple of months, so the member states can start already implementing it. Just a few words which are important. One of the big debates, it was exactly on the scope of the technologies that should be included in the list of the strategic net zero technologies. So I think the Parliament took a very strong position in a different approach compared to what the Commission did before. So we managed to ensure that we have a very extensive list of technology that includes renewable technologies, components for nuclear technologies as well. We put a very strong emphasis on carbon capture storage and the infrastructure for transporting that, which was missing from the initial proposal, and it is crucially important. So basically the idea was to make sure that we boost the domestic production of all those technologies that are part of the list of the net zero technologies, to boost that production in the member states, to boost the domestic production. So having said that, the Parliament took a very strong value chain approach. We wanted to ensure that the whole process, the whole value chain is covered, which we believe initially was missing from the proposal of the Commission. So it is important that we took a very pragmatic, practical, and realistic approach. Here comes the question, where is the UK role in all that, what we have done? So as it was already mentioned, there was a big debate in terms of how to involve the UK and Norway when it comes to the CO2 storage, and we've realized that, of course, there is much more capacity in the UK for various reasons, and Europe is lagging behind on having the infrastructure established yet. So there is a specific chapter in the legislation which resolves that problem. So EU member states would be allowed to identify the neighboring countries, which obviously is the UK, to build the infrastructure for transporting the CO2 and to use already existing sites in the UK and Norway. So this should happen following an establishment of new agreements covering that provision, but it is already in the text. And I believe this is a good messaging here because it does present a very good midterm opportunity for collaboration between the UK and the EU, both governments, regulators and companies. When it comes that they operate together, build up the know-how and kind of share experience of how to refurbish the old existing gas pipelines into something which is going to be useful for our green transformation going forward. So it's a very good sign, and it was well perceived and accepted by all the political parties and all the members of the European Parliament that were involved in the negotiation and that were voting on this file. I took more than 2 minutes, but I thought this is a very important remark because it has a very specific impact on the relationship and the opportunities for the future cooperation among us. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Lord Little.
Thank you. I should say I'm speaking here personally. I don't know, I'm not speaking for the Labour Party. And I also speak from a large measure of ignorance on this subject. But I have very clear views about the direction in which we should be going. It seems to me that the issue fundamentally on these questions is whether we think we have more get more advantage as Britain and the EU by working together than by trying to compete against each other for advantage. And I am very much in the former camp. I think that means that, and I think that this is an inevitable consequence of North Sea cooperation, that we have a common electricity pricing system. And I also think that the divergence that's occurred in our ETS systems is very regrettable. And I don't know quite why it has occurred, because I'm not expert enough in it. But I know that Britain, we have changed our policy, and I don't know for what reason, on allowances. So I'd be quite interested in your views on, in your explanation of that. But I would have thought that we have to bring that together as well if we're going to have a common approach to CBAMs. And of course I welcome the fact that I think the British Chancellor of the Exchequer's made, Jeremy Hunt's made pretty clear that he thinks that there should be a common approach. Which is good. Another point, if I just, before my time runs out, we should be looking particularly at cooperation in areas like the steel industry, which are heavy emitters of carbon, and where, of course, both in Britain and in the EU, nation states are giving huge subsidies in order to transform these heavy industries away from carbon emission. It's a very complex set of issues, but I think we gain more by openness and cooperation than by trying to compete against each other.
Thank you. Next speaker is Georgios Kyrtsos.
Thank you. Well, it seems to me there are quite some differences in the energy sector between the European Union and the United Kingdom, but it's also a common secret that there are a lot of differences within the European Union as far as the energy sector is concerned. But I think that what unites us are common problems. For instance, you are becoming smaller, it was pointed out, rightly so, in a larger world. Brexit made us even smaller, both the European Union and the United Kingdom. Then the green transition coincides or even correlates with higher energy prices, and this creates a lot of popular reaction. As politicians, we find out that we have been too ambitious, and we are trying to reconcile our objectives with political reality, because we don't want, let's say, movements like the yellow jackets in France or the farmers in the Netherlands. And of course, there is a geopolitical dimension. Everything is complicated. We have the war in Ukraine, which is not, Russia is doing rather well, it seems. We have OPEC Plus, Russia collaborating with OPEC. We have China, which is the main trading partner with the OPEC countries and exerts influence. So it's getting more and more complicated. I think I would like to point out that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement foresees that the United Kingdom and the EU, quote, shall cooperate on carbon pricing. They shall give serious consideration to linking the respective carbon pricing systems in a way that preserves the integrity of these schemes and provides for the possibility to increase their effectiveness. So I think we recognize the problem, but we are not quite sure how to tackle it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Baroness Crawley.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to our speakers, to Tace and to Marina. I agree very much with my colleague, Roger Liddell, that our newfound sense of positivity between the UK and the EU post-Brexit can surely be put to use in meeting this enormous challenge of climate change, as with our last debate on AI. The EU's introduction of its carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM, in October of this year is very much a welcome step forward in decarbonising not just Europe, but if it works, beyond Europe, through the vehicle of trade. So can I ask a couple of questions of our speakers, if they're able to have a think about it? And they're on the timetable of CBAM and on business preparedness. Do our speakers get any sense of flexibility in the timetable for adopting the EU reporting methods under CBAM? From discussions with UK businesses and civil servants, I get the impression that certainly smaller importers into the EU are perhaps not as ready as they should be for these changes. So what, if anything, is the opportunity for flexibility? And in order to avoid the punishing fees that will come beyond 2026, could businesses be hopeful of a linkage in the UK-EU carbon pricing schemes as set out, of course, in the TCA? Because I think that would help the atmosphere enormously. Yes, we've got to get on with climate change, friends. We've got to get on with the mitigation, rather, of climate change if we're ever to look our grandchildren in the eye on net zero. But we must also bring all of our business communities with us, because they are the wealth creators. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Helmut Scholz.
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to repeat with a lot of what have said I agree with, but maybe some additional thoughts or ideas. I really welcome that the TCA contains explicit provisions to fight against climate change as one of the essential elements of this agreement. So this means that the climate targets are therefore an important element of the level playing field part of the agreement, and the TCA is fairly strict when it comes to climate protection. In case of failure of a party, the other party can launch dispute resolution procedures. A weakness of the TCA is, however, from my point of view, that neither the system for issuing and trading the CO2 certificates nor the price of the CO2 certificates is specified in the agreement. And that is true for a lot of trade agreements the EU has concluded. So we sit here and talk about what to do. And I want to say that as a CBAM is only in force since October 1st, 2023, to be introduced in phases over 3 years. And that means in the end, the price difference between the CO2 certificate in the United Kingdom and the EU would have to be equalized at the border. So that is a welcoming step. Probably we all agree on that. To avoid this, a country would have to link its emission trading system with that of the European Union to be faster and to deal with that, also what is just currently happening in Dubai, when we try to find an international, a global solution to the question how we are fighting climate change. So I can only call the United Kingdom to align its CO2 emission trading scheme with the EU, like Switzerland has done it, that was have already said, and by that also to contribute that the EU is increasing its effort to decarbonizing its own economy. So it is a mutual challenge and a mutual, how to say it, responsibility. And finally, we have to think that the CBAM as a mechanism, as a tool, must be introduced in a more global understanding. So that is not only seen as an effort by the European Union to deal with that issue, but that we also understand that if other countries, other regions are introducing similar or different systems, they have to be unified and put together. So we have to find in the timeline, the World Climate Council is giving us 20 years, 25 years maximum to deal with the climate change, to find here a solution in a joint effort. Thank you.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Please try to stick to your speaking time because there are still several requests for the floor. Now, next speaker is Baroness Hayter.
Thank you. I'd like to raise something about the steel industry, particularly the primary steel makers. This does particularly affect Wales. And because of that, the Welsh Government has made representations to the UK Government calling, I mean, it's fairly general, for a UK CBAM as soon as possible, because there is a real problem otherwise. There are two particular concerns. One is that the cost to EU importers of any extra paperwork could lead them to source from within the EU or indeed from other countries whose ETSs are more linked to the EU, obviously a detriment to the UK and to Wales, but also the absence of a UK equivalent scheme could divert high emissions steel from the EU market back to the UK, and that would undercut our own steel production here. So I guess the questions to our two speakers is how do we avoid the negative consequences of any delay in introducing some equivalence between the UK and the EU schemes? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Colin Markey.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just really want to pick up on comments from two previous speakers. Lord Teverson and his references in relation to the UK and the lost messaging in terms of renewables. I think it's actually very accurate. When I fly from Brussels to Ireland, I often pass over and see the scale of offshore renewables that the UK have, and in many ways I think that message is lost. And I just want to pick up on base of that from what Sean Kelly had said in relation to, if you like, the need to align our policies. If the policies are aligned, then the ETS is aligned, then CBAM is essentially redundant. And my concern is that whereas in the UK case, there's tangible delivery, in the European case, there's ambition for delivery. And it may not be, and how you align ambition on one side and indeed targets on one side with delivery, because I think the two won't necessarily align in due course. But the delivery is what we need to align, that will align if you like, the ambition won't deliver the numbers. The delivery will deliver to match up with the CBAM and make CBAM essentially redundant between the two if we can make that work. So how we can make that happen, I think, is the key point. The second point I just want to make was in relation to the broad ambition, the talk of the North Sea, 120 gigawatts. Just to put that in context, I think the current UK usage is half of that. And if you talk about it, I look at it from an Irish context, we'd use about 1/20 of that, but we're talking about doubling air usage when we decarbonise our heating and our transport. So the scale of the demand is enormous, and I think to limit ourselves, as was previously mentioned, to the North Sea is really restricting our potential. I think we have to look at the Celtic Sea, the Atlantic. We have to look at also how we interconnect, because all of what we're talking about here is offshore wind, and wind varies. I saw over I took 2 points in the last fortnight where at one stage in Ireland 88% of our energy was being provided by renewables, and 2 weeks later, at the same time, 10% of our energy was being provided by renewables. So the variation is very substantial. The need to integrate on one side, but more importantly, the need to align our ambition with our delivery across and align both countries in terms of that, I think is critical in terms of to eliminate the CBAM debate.
Thank you. Next speaker is member of the Legislative Assembly of Northern Ireland, Diane Dodds, as an observer.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this morning's debate. In Northern Ireland, we have a strong recognition that action is needed to curtail the effects of climate change. As Minister for the Economy, I published the new energy strategy, which gave the commitment to doubling the size of our low-carbon and renewable energy economy and supporting our net zero ambitions for 2050. The signs so far are encouraging, and given the last contribution, I am happy to report to the Assembly that in 2022, more than half of all electricity used in Northern Ireland came from renewable sources, and we have set an ambitious target to raise that to 80% by 2030. Earlier this year, Wrightbus secured funding from the government's Net Zero Hydrogen Fund to build a new, innovative and multi-million-pound green hydrogen production facility in Ballymena. And like other members here this morning, we also have to stress that this transition to a low-carbon economy needs to be fair and it needs to be just for working families. But what we've achieved in Northern Ireland to date has been achieved despite the disruption caused by the Border for Plants and Energy-Saving Materials imposed by the Protocol Windsor Framework. Even now, there are varieties of trees that still cannot be planted by school children and conservation charities in Northern Ireland because of the ban imposed by the protocol. And if the EU is sincere in its climate credentials, we have to wonder why it has chosen to undermine those in Northern Ireland's case. This morning we've heard Lord Ricketts and indeed Sean Kelly talk about CBAM and the impact that it would have in their respective jurisdictions. In Northern Ireland, this will be imposed on us under the provisions of the Protocol Windsor Framework. This would impose new green taxes on the movement of things like steel, iron, cement and fertiliser between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Local manufacturers account for the bulk of energy consumption in our province. They account also for the bulk of trade in these goods, which are processed in Northern Ireland. Many of these firms, including those in the agri-food sector, have already expressed fears that they could be negatively impacted. Instead of the main effect of levying a new set of charges on goods arriving from GB, this will dissuade more British businesses from supplying goods to the Northern Ireland market. And it will be to give another excuse to many in the EU for what are negligible risks to their market. We know that thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of pounds of trade could be placed in jeopardy.
Can you conclude?
Sorry, just to finish. I am not, I don't want you to take my word for it, but the Centre for Inclusive Trade Policy has issued these warnings. In Northern Ireland, we account for 3% of the UK's population, but we produce around 20% of the UK's food. And that is a real, and CBAM provides a real risk to agri-food production in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Next speaker is Danuta Hübner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to allude to what Lord Teverson mentioned. You said going backward or coming backward, going backward, I think it was. And indeed, when I heard the comments, I think it was in September, where this announcement of the review of the net zero policy was made public. My understanding was that the UK is going to drop the core targets of this of its very ambitious policy. And also when meeting with the British chambers, they are coming now after Windsor framework opened the doors in Brussels, they are coming often and share with us also their concerns. They have the similar actually opinion that emission cost in the UK would go down before 2026, even more than it was mentioned already today. And then of course the EU CBAM will hit, because in 26, the first time the payment on the borders will have to take place, so that this EU policy will hit especially the carbon-intensive industries. I think steel was mentioned by Lord Little, but there is also aluminium, probably also electricity in its totality. So there is this risk. Could you, because when I was listening to you, I had this different impression that you were optimistic and just saying you are going in the right direction. So could you confirm that I am wrong with my comment? And if then Minister Jeremy Hunt is going to propose a kind of CBAM in 2026, I would be boring in saying, endorsing what other colleagues said, that it would be the best thing, of course, to have this linking of the two CBAMs, and this would just make the costs, additional costs of the British export or European imports will disappear. But of course, there is a risk that this policy might be considered a dynamic alignment, which, as we know, the British side was desperately, strongly, radically against in the negotiations. And one thing on Switzerland, we negotiated this deal more than 7 years. So if you take into account also informal talks, it was practically 10 years. So we don't have much time, because we would have also to negotiate with UK this taking over the European CBAM. And last thing...
Can you please conclude?
Last sentence, yes. I'm concluding that there is also the dimension of the EU CBAM in the context of of the protocol, because EU CBAM can be also a new issue in our relations with Northern Ireland. So just for the future.
Thank you. Last speaker is François Alfonsi.
Qui va parler en français. Voilà.
I'm going to speak in French, if I may. I'd like to welcome the UK's ambition in terms of renewable energy. The North Sea project is remarkable and extremely ambitious, and it's going to make this part of the world a global leader in renewables, and an unreproachable leader, because there are lots of countries that are somewhat duplicitous in their development. The USA is developing shale gas at the same time. But here, there's going to be the involvement of Scotland. And this is an extraordinary matter when it comes to fighting against climate change and developing renewable energies. And this project, as it is, and perhaps even more so in the future, requires the opening of the energy market borders by Europe. And we need to cooperate here. I think it's in Europe's interest to import decarbonized energy from the UK rather than oil from Azerbaijan, for example. Having said this, might we not propose in the framework of this Partnership Assembly that the executives of Europe and the UK, and of course Ireland, because what can be done in the North Sea can be done in that shared maritime space. And I think that this should be a common cause to be developed together in a procedure to be defined, of course, but I think that there is interest here. The problems raised on carbon exchange, carbon border exchange, are very important, and at some point the UK will be a decarbonized leader. But this project needs to be as ambitious as possible, and the energy market needs to be open to allow for this. There's a lot of investment involved in Europe as well, not only in the UK. I think it would be important to establish cooperation. I lost my father last year, and I remember that the only time when he spoke about shares that he'd purchased were shares in the Eurotunnel. He was so proud of those shares. He didn't talk about anything else because other shares weren't important to him. So I think that Europe and the UK, well, he'd be proud of such a project.
Back to our speakers, starting with Ms. Skrinar. Try to answer as shortly as possible because we are running out of time, but please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Okay, I will try and be very quick. Firstly, I'd just like to reassure Lord Teverson and others that the North Seas Energy Cooperation Grouping is particularly with the North Seas on purpose to include areas such as the Celtic Sea. So yes, we have absolutely recognised that, and it's an important part of how we think about offshore development, but also how we cooperate, is absolutely including those areas. There were many questions about, firstly, on UK climate ambition. I can very much confirm that we remain completely committed to our climate change agenda and to our commitments, which are set out in law. The last speaker spoke about how we will be very decarbonised, but actually we have achieved the fastest rate of all CO2 emissions reductions in major economies between 1990 and 2021, and we are absolutely scaling up, and we have very ambitious targets, so please remain committed, content with our commitment and level of commitment on climate change. On the ETS, so I'd just like to note it's a market mechanism, both in the UK and in the EU, so it's difficult to comment specifically on market prices because it is a market mechanism, and that's also why it would be quite difficult to bring into the level playing field kind of legislation because it is a market mechanism. But I would like to reassure you that we recognise what has happened with the prices and that through the UK ETS Authority, we have through this year in 2023 taken a far more ambitious and have implemented a net zero consistent cap for the ETS. So in July, we published reforms that include a 30% reduction in the emissions cap, and that means the supply of allowances that will enter the market will fall significantly every year from 2024. And we have published the auction calendar, which again will help provide certainty, but also demonstrate our commitment and ambition to ensure the ETS remains a key part of how we decarbonise. On the CBAM and carbon leakage in generally, we recognise the challenges that you all have raised, and that is why we have been watching the development of the EU CBAM very closely, and we were very pleased to be part of an observing group during the workings of the CBAM last year and before that. That is also why we have been really looking closely at our carbon leakage policy across the UK with the consultation I mentioned earlier this year, and we will respond. On our readiness, particularly for when the EU CBAM comes into force, obviously we've already started looking at that with the reporting, but just to sort of make sure it's clear, UK exporters are not directly responsible for EU CBAM charges. That's how it works. The cost is borne by the EU importer, but obviously we recognise that could result in pass-through costs or reduced competitiveness. So we get that. We have been discussing the requirements with our EU partners a lot, and as the reporting process and time transition period happens, we will continue to work really closely with our EU colleagues in DG Taxud on how we can make sure that it works as well as possible for UK business. On linking, our colleague over there, Georges, helpfully quoted the Trading Cooperation Agreement to us, so I won't do so again, but just to confirm, we absolutely remain committed to the shared commitments that we said in the TCA to give consideration to linking our carbon markets. And then also on international efforts, we spoke a little bit about, you were asking a little bit about the international efforts on carbon leakage. It's been quite a focus actually of the trade day at COP, which was yesterday, I think, or Sunday. And we have been working through the UNFCCC, so the COP processes, but also the World Trade Organization, G7, G20, and also the OECD through things like the Glasgow Breakthrough Agendas, which cover industrial, steel, cement, and the Industrial Decarbonisation Initiative, and of course the Climate Club, which was actually a German initiative through their G7 presidency. So we are working really closely with EU partners, but also internationally on carbon leakage measures. I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Toys Reuter.
Thank you very much, Chair. In an ideal world without free allowances and with a perfectly aligned, fully global ETS, you would not need CBAM. But on our way to the ideal world, we do need it, as also was called for even by the industry. And I think that's an important remark by Diane Hayter, because I think the industry understands that it's not only a measurement to calculate between zones with different systems, but it's also an important measure for the EU, but also for the UK, I imagine, to protect your industry against unfair competition. I will not go into the timetable. Helmut Scholz said some good things about it, explaining the phases, but, and it also goes too far now to do the whole discussion that you had in the Lords about also the market mechanism, which is the same thing that the colleague said. But yes, the market mechanism is not something that you can continuously hide behind, because this market mechanism is also influenced by other things. And it is a fact, and it goes too far to deepen it, but the inability to eliminate other carbon leakage, such as the free allowances, makes that the systems are going to diverge. And I think it's impeding us to increase the price, which is necessary independently from the CBAM connection. It is necessary to promote innovation and to meet the targets and to align, preferably, with the most close markets, in this case the EU ETS price market. Just briefly on the aviation, because Lord Teverson and I read also in the debate in the Lords about the aviation, I think on that particular element EU and UK are aligned in the sense that they are looking at phasing out the free allowances by 2026, I believe. But then there's an important other thing, that if the aviation industry in Corsia does not agree and align with the Paris climate targets, then yes, the EU will step in to also come in with legislation there to align it with the ETS and CBAM.
Well, thank you very much to our colleagues and our speakers. I think it's very difficult to sum up everything that has been said. But I think we all agree that when it comes to climate change, we have to join forces. We have to work together for a common approach. Yes, it is a huge challenge. We should not paralyze us or give us an alibi to enter into any sort of blame game. And yes, we have to be able to face the end of the world or the end of the month at the same time. But we cannot close our eyes, and we have to make sure we find the most appropriate level to tackle climate change. It can be citizens level, it can be local, it can be national, European and global, but every single level has to be used. Let us not find reasons or pretexts not to act. Let us not slow down. Let us not shy away. I think our role is to listen to our fellow citizens, to explain and to act. So this is what leadership is about, and how we do it is of course quite complex, but whether we do it should not even be a question. Now I give the floor to Oliver for the next item of the agenda,
which is about the future work of the PPA. The Bureau has had some discussions already about potential topics for discussion at our next PPA. So far we've had the possible subjects of interference in elections, which clearly with so many coming up in this year is an important one. Security cooperation and the protection of critical national infrastructure is a second topic, and the third was to do with returning to our previous work, which we've had as a theme throughout, on energy and energy trading. But clearly we would discuss these topics further, and any that come up in the three contributions I believe we're about to hear. So I'll call Mr. Oh, sorry, Natalie.
No, I'll skip my own intervention because, of course, we had this discussion in the Bureau, and I fully share what you just introduced.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So we've got Mr. Georgios Kyrtos to be the first speaker.
I'm not quite sure whether I'm intervening at the right time, but is it a discussion about future prospects and ideas that we could have in order to improve our collaboration?
Yes, it's matters which we should discuss at the next plenary.
Okay, fine. I have some thoughts. I read a very interesting article in the Sunday Times that shows the complexity behind the Brexit process. When the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union, one of the main issues was the flow of migrants, and at the time there were 330,000 per year. According to the Sunday Times article that I read, during 2023, the flows of migrants and asylum seekers more than doubled than during the period when the United Kingdom decided in favor of Brexit. It was around 700,000. And the article underlined that the kind of flows that you have right now does not help you to cover the needs of your labor market, because most of the people that come are from third countries and could be relatives of those that are already here, or anyway, they are not, let's say, prepared to enter the labor market and cover your needs. So my thought is that by reading the statistics and the fact that you have less people working in the United Kingdom coming from European Union member countries, I think we should get together and give us a kind of precedence to reverse the argument about the Filipinos that it was used yesterday, because our labor force, whether they are Greeks, I am from Greece, whether they are from Romania, Bulgaria, maybe Ukraine, because we want to, let's say, to enlarge towards Ukraine, are better prepared for your labor market.
Sorry, we're just over the time now.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
They are,
if you could conclude,
closer to their country of origin.
Thank you very much. And I'll call Baroness Mubarak.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to say something I mentioned yesterday, use of electronic trade documents. It's really important that we align that across the EU. Germany is almost fully aligned. They just have the bills of exchange legislation to go through, but there's no central EU Commission mechanism. This is the legislation would be the competence of the EU member states, but this is something that we should really work, sort of galvanize the support for this, because the impact would be really transformative. And I gave some statistics yesterday produced by the International Chambers of Commerce, and I think this is something that we can get our teeth into.
Thank you very much. We've got Jürgen Warborn next, and then finally it'll be Chris McManus.
Thank you very much. I very much would like to echo what Baroness Mubarak just said and endorse it, because I think it is quite a small change with a very, very big impact. And isn't it strange that today we need paper in international trade? And we have a lot of paper. There is purchasing order, that's insurance paper, there is bill of ladings, there is warehouse documents, there is papers and papers and papers. And they cannot be electronic this year. And we could change this. So I think we should discuss this. There is a lot of savings, both in terms of euros and pounds, but also in terms of climate impact if we reduce paper. So I fully support that, and I think we should discuss it next time. Thank you.
And finally, Chris McManus.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the future work, I think in the first instance, maybe the consideration could be given regarding the role of the assemblies from Scotland, Wales and the north of Ireland. I accept they're observers here, but I think they should be entitled to full speaking rights and entitlements the same as the rest of us. There are only 6 of them in total, so maybe that's something the co-chairs can pick up on. In terms of possible items for discussion in the next plenary, an exchange of views on human rights, especially concerns that some of us on this side may have regarding the British government articulating the possibility of leaving the ECHR, and in the same vein, the Legacy Act, which is a breach of the GFA and subsequently by extension Article 2 of the protocol. And I'm assuming my brevity will ensure their inclusion, Chair.
I think it's a bit of a, well, I won't comment. Anyway, thank you very much. Good try, and I'll hand over to Natalie.
Well, thank you very much for your ideas. The good news is that we are going to have a next meeting in Brussels in March 2024. Despite our electoral calendars, we managed to have an exception for the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, because normally we don't welcome third states delegation, or we don't go on missions, but for the PPA we managed to have authorization, and I'm very happy about it. Now it comes to the most exciting point of the agenda, which is any other business. Does anyone have something to raise on this point of the agenda? If not the case, the floor is back to you, Oliver.
Well, the final item is the date and the place of the next meeting, which is in Brussels on the 18th and 19th of March 2024. With that, can I wish everybody a very happy Christmas and season, and thank you very much for coming. It's been a marvellous plenary.